Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're taking a really close look at something that honestly touches almost every single one of us. We're doing a comprehensive psychological dive into the anatomy of a short fuse. You know exactly what I mean, right? We all know someone who just seems to have one. Or hey, if we're being completely honest with ourselves, sometimes that person is looking right back at us in the mirror. You're driving, someone cuts you off, and boom, your blood instantly boils. But why does this actually happen? What's the real mechanism at play here? Well, let's uncover the truth.
So why do tiny inconveniences trigger absolute rage? Picture this, you're trying to send a really important email, and the internet connection is just painfully slow. Or maybe you're already running 5 minutes late and you realize you've completely misplaced your keys. Suddenly, you go from 0 to 100 in a fraction of a second. Now, from the outside looking in, it looks like a massive overreaction, right? The people around you might say, hey, relax, it's not that big of a deal. Or, why are you getting so angry over a set of keys?
But we really need to acknowledge a profound truth here. In that exact moment, the intense anger feels completely justified and incredibly real. When we're on the inside of that overwhelming emotional explosion, it feels entirely warranted. It doesn't feel like an overreaction at all. It feels like literally the only appropriate response to what's happening. But the fascinating thing about human psychology is that anger is rarely just about the anger. It is almost never actually about the slow internet or those missing keys. To understand what's genuinely happening, we've got to look behind the curtain.
Section 1. The brain's hijack.
To truly understand a short fuse, we first need to look at what's called a biological hijack. Basically, when you snap, your body is executing a rapid-fire biological sequence that happens way faster than conscious thought. It's this instant rush, a flood of chemicals preparing you for action before you even realize what's going on. Deep inside your brain, you have this tiny almond-shaped structure called the amygdala. Think of it as your brain's built-in security guard. Its whole job is to handle emotional responses and survival instincts. So when a trigger happens, a highly sensitive amygdala instantly floods your body with adrenaline and cortisol. And here's the kicker. It completely bypasses your prefrontal cortex. That's the rational, logical part of your brain that might otherwise step in and say, hey, wait a minute, it was just an accident. But by the time your logic actually catches up, your brain has already been hijacked.
And this poses a pretty profound problem for our primitive brains. Thousands of years ago, if a physical threat, let's say a literal bear, jumped out at you, your amygdala's instant reaction saved your life. It prepared you to fight or run. But here's the catch today. The amygdala isn't very good at telling the difference between a physical threat, like that bear, and an emotional threat, like being insulted, feeling disrespected, or losing your keys. If you have a quick temper, your biological alarm system is just incredibly loud, treating minor daily stressors as actual matters of life and death. You aren't consciously choosing to be furious, your biology is simply reacting.
Section 2. Anger as a secondary emotion.
But you know, biology, as powerful as it is really only half the story. Let's look at the psychological side of things where it gets profoundly vulnerable. We're now looking at anger not as a primary reaction, but as a secondary emotion. When we approach this through the lens of therapy, we start to uncover these deeply hidden layers of pain that exist right underneath that immediate explosion of rage. You see, anger rarely travels alone. In the world of psychology, it's widely recognized as a bodyguard. It usually shows up to protect us from a primary emotion that just feels far too exposing or painful to deal with directly. Think about it. If you feel exposed, hurt, or scared, you instinctively don't want the world to see that vulnerability, right? So the bodyguard of anger steps out in front of you. It puffs up its chest, looks tough, and tries to scare that perceived threat away.
Let's examine the 3 most common hidden drivers behind this emotional bodyguard. First up is fear and anxiety. When things feel totally out of control, anger is an aggressive attempt to regain it. For example, a parent screaming at their child for running into the street isn't being hateful. They were just absolutely terrified, and that fear came out as anger. Second is rejection or inadequacy. If someone secretly worries they're a failure, even a minor criticism triggers intense shame. The brain instantly converts that shame into anger to attack back. And third, we have exhaustion and burnout. Sometimes a short fuse literally just means an empty tank. When you're chronically stressed or completely sleep-deprived, your resilience drops to 0. You simply lack the mental energy to process frustration calmly.
Section 3. Your childhood blueprint.
So, where does this highly sensitive alarm system actually come from? Well, for many people, the blueprint was drawn long before they can even consciously remember. We learn how to handle our emotions through emotional modeling, primarily by just watching the adults around us during our early life. And the lessons we absorb as kids carry directly into how our adult nervous systems handle stress today. Consider the stark contrast between these 2 early environments. If a child grows up in an explosive environment, a household where problems were solved by yelling, slamming doors, or throwing tantrums, their developing brain registers that behavior as the default setting for stress. They learn that anger equals protection. On the flip side, what if a child grows up in a dismissive environment where they're told to stop crying and that their feelings just don't matter? They learn that soft emotions like sadness are ignored. But anger? Anger makes people stop and look. They learn that anger equals attention.
Furthermore, individuals who grew up in unpredictable or emotionally unsafe environments often develop a state of hypervigilance. And let me tell you, this is an exhausting way to live. Your mind is constantly scanning the room for danger, just perpetually waiting for the other shoe to drop. As an adult, this translates into a constant, lingering readiness to fight. When your baseline state is already set to threat detected, it severely shortens your fuse for literally everything else.
Section 4. The danger of shoulds.
Now that we've covered the biological and historical roots, this brings us right to present-day cognitive psychology and the deeply rigid rules reactive people unconsciously project onto the world around them. This is how the way we think actively fuels the fire. Cognitive behavioral psychologists have actually found that a quick temper is often linked to should framing. Consider this internal monologue. Things should go exactly the way I planned them. Or perhaps, people should always be polite, or traffic should move smoothly. Look, we all have expectations, but highly reactive people hold these rules incredibly rigidly. So when reality inevitably breaks one of these impossible rules, the brain doesn't just register it as a minor annoyance, it registers it as a profound injustice. It feels like a direct, personal violation.
And that leads right into personalization, which is the habit of interpreting a totally unrelated event as a deliberate personal attack or a sign of disrespect. Think about it. If a store clerk is rude, a person without a short fuse might just think, wow, they must be having a rough day. But someone who personalizes the event instantly thinks, they are doing this to disrespect me. They think I'm a joke. When you combine those rigid shoulds with the habit of taking minor inconveniences personally, you create the absolute perfect psychological storm for instant rage.
Section 5. Elongating the fuse.
Okay, this is the most empowering part of this entire explainer. We've looked at the darker underlying causes, but now it's time to pivot to actionable wisdom and the actual mechanics of lasting change. If you recognize any of these traits in yourself, listen closely, because things absolutely can get better. A short fuse is a deeply ingrained nervous system habit. It is not a permanent personality trait. Habits, no matter how biologically entrenched they might feel, can be changed. The goal here isn't to eliminate anger entirely. Honestly, anger is a natural, healthy human emotion that signals when our boundaries have been crossed. The real goal is to rewire the biological habit so that your rational thought actually has time to return before you react.
So to actively widen that gap between your triggers and your reactions, you can follow these 3 actionable steps. First, understand the biology. Recognize when an amygdala hijack is happening in real time and take a physical step back. Second, identify those hidden emotions. Ask yourself, what is my anger bodyguarding right now? Am I actually just scared, maybe ashamed, or completely exhausted? And third, challenge your rigid expectations. We need to let go of the shoulds and stop taking the random, everyday chaos of the world as a personal attack against us.
The famous psychologist and Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl beautifully captured the essence of this psychological work when he said, "Between stimulus and response there's a space, and that space is our power to choose our response." Finding that calm mental space is the ultimate goal here. It's exactly where you take back control from your primitive brain.
So as we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with this powerful question. How will you use your space? Will you let the biology of a short fuse dictate your reactions, or will you do the work to look behind the anger and choose a completely different path? Thank you so much for joining me today. If this explainer helped you understand yourself or maybe someone in your life a little better, please subscribe for more deep dives into the fascinating world of human psychology. Keep learning, keep reflecting, and I'll see you next time.